Tēnā koutou katoa, ko rperry toko ingoa. I'm manager for Thriving People at the Sustainable Business Council. Thank you all for joining us. We have a very exciting webinar for you today, where we will be shining a light on what we mean by the term just transitions, how New Zealand businesses can help make the zero carbon transition an equitable one, and what systems level changes will help us get there. Our conversation is timely, with the government launching its discussion documents on the emissions reduction plan this morning. And joining me in conversation today will be Catherine Leining, Policy Fellow from Motu. Hi, Catherine. Claire Waghorn, Sustainable Transitions Leader from Christchurch International Airport. And also joining us is SBC's Head of Climate, Kate Wilson-Butler, who will link the conversation back to the emissions reduction plan with some initial insights and reflections on the discussion document from government. We will have open Q&A later in the session, so please use the chat box to send us your questions. We will have little time really to digest the government's discussion document, as you all have had, and it's quite clear that there's much work to be done, but that provides us great opportunity to shape it. I think my first reflection within the context of today's webinar is the fact that it's good to see that the government sees the need for an equitable transition strategy. It was one of the recommendations from the Climate Commission's recommendations, and it's also something that SBC and our members have been advocating for. From our perspective, it is crucial that the emissions reduction plan must ensure that the transition to a zero carbon economy is fair, equitable, and inclusive. And it is within the context of this just transition that SBC has a critical role to play in supporting thriving people, and it also provides the context for today's webinar. So let's get into it. Thanks for joining us, Catherine. It's good to see you. We've been having some early conversations with our members around what a just transition is, and it's fair to say that not only is it complex, but there seems to be very different levels of understanding and different approaches to it, with businesses coming at it from various angles, including skills, digital transformation, as well as climate change. So to get us underway, from your perspective, what does the term just transitions mean, and how has the concept evolved?
Well, tēnā koe, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for creating this opportunity. Just before I dive in, I'll mention that I am speaking in my Motu capacity and not as one of New Zealand's climate change commissioners. And Motu itself is an independent research organization, so we don't take an organizational position on issues. I'm very much speaking as an independent researcher. This is an area I feel very passionately about, and I'm really glad to have a conversation about it. In my view, Aotearoa doesn't yet have a clear social consensus on what a just transition means. It's a very broad basket, which creates both opportunities and challenges. The term itself evolved out of the union movement in the 1990s to help protect workers who were being affected by fossil fuel regulation and other environmental regulations. So the base was key themes around enabling decent work, poverty alleviation, environmental sustainability, and the involvement of workers and unions in business decision making. And since then, this sort of river of worker justice has merged with a river of environmental justice, looking at the impacts of climate change itself and of economic operations on disadvantaged communities, and then the issue of social justice and how we ensure the well-being of all people. So it's very much a multi-dimensional movement right now, and I think this is an area where we do need to build shared understanding. But I think for me, at the heart level, if I put it in really simple terms, it's really about how we take care of each other as we walk together through a very rapid and disruptive transition. And yeah, so I think that's how I would describe it at the core.
And just building on that, where have we got to in terms of progressing just transitions in Aotearoa and New Zealand?
Well, the call for a just transition sits in the Paris Agreement, and the New Zealand government has already started to pull the just transition concepts into some of its key pillars on climate action, but we haven't had a lot of specifics yet. And so far, the early action has been focused at a regional level, particularly around government support for a community-led 2050 roadmap in the Taranaki region. And the government is now looking to support a similar initiative in Southland with the planned departure of the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. The Climate Change Commission had called for an equitable transition strategy in its final advice report. And that included themes like supporting workers with the transition, including distributional impacts assessment in policy decision-making, supporting households with the transition, and I'm trying to think what I'm missing here. And of course, taking a partnership approach between the Crown and iwi Māori to support a just transition. And it's nice to see some of those recommendations picked up in the government's consultation document. The government is required to give consideration to these issues under the Climate Change Response Act. This was part of the Zero Carbon Act that was passed in 2019. So the government is really required to think about how these impacts will affect workers and different regions and different socioeconomic groups in iwi Māori. So the government is also responding to a legal obligation to give these considerations due treatment.
Cool. So I think I mentioned earlier that it seems that just transitions as a concept means many things to many people. But there are commonalities, and there's a real common view held across the members of SBC that we've spoken to so far. And that common view held by members is the need for a vision, a vision or an overarching goal that we can all work towards, and also informs the development of a comprehensive systems-led strategy. Also the need for true collaboration between government and business, as well as civil society and others, including Māori that you mentioned. To in part address the impacts sectorally and regionally, such as how we build skills and capability within our supply chains. And also the need for making sure that all government decisions have a just transitions lens, so our approach is integrated and not siloed. So they're just a few of the insights that we're gleaming, but from your perspective, what do you see as being the key components of a systems-led approach to deliver the goal of a just transition for climate?
Wow, it's great to hear what the reflections are that are coming up from your membership. To me, an effective systems-led approach has to be grounded in a shared vision, and that vision has to evolve from the bottom up. It can't come from government in isolation. And there are diverse communities that need to have a voice in shaping that vision and helping all of us understand what a just transition means to them and what the core elements are. I think beyond that, to help build on a shared vision, realizing a just transition, it takes principles, processes, and practices to actually make it happen. And it's all of those things happening at the same time. A systems-led approach is very integrated, and that means we would think about both mitigation and adaptation at the same time. We would need to be looking at how opportunities, burdens, costs, and benefits are distributed regionally across different sectors, across different economic groups, and across generations. And we need to have more inclusive and participatory processes for business decision-making and social decision-making. And then we need policies that really safeguard well-being at the end of the day. And I think one of the big challenges in a systems-wide approach, it's not just about avoiding future injustice, but also helping to correct some of the things that aren't working today and really address, past and current social injustices. So I think a systems-wide approach would consider all of those things, which makes it very complex and something that's going to continue to evolve over time.
Thank you, Catherine. That is a great context, especially at that macroeconomic policy level. And I want to bring in Claire now into the conversation in terms of what does this mean for business? From a personal perspective, and I speak on behalf of my colleagues, Christchurch International Airport's leadership on climate and broader sustainability is nothing but inspiring. So it's really good to have you join us, Claire. the conversations we've had with Malcolm Johns he is lovely in the way that he always talks about just transitions as one of three pillars of climate action. The others, as Catherine spoke about earlier, about climate adaptation and mitigation. So can you just give us a little bit of a précis in terms of how Christchurch International Airport is thinking about just transitions or equitable transitions?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. And it's absolutely a privilege to be part of this panel. We learn so much from the SBC and CLC. And every time Catherine speaks, I just get a wealth of knowledge from her. So thank you for having me. You're right. Our climate action plan at Christchurch Airport has those three pillars: reduction, adaptation, and just transition. And they're interconnected. So I'll just briefly tell you about the first two and then get into just transition a bit more. So reduction for us is measuring, monitoring, and reporting on our greenhouse gas footprint and having that independently verified. We've done that since 2006. It was a really different footprint back then. There were sheep on the runway. It was really interesting. First airport in the world to have an independently verified footprint, thanks to Motu, which was Environmark back then. You then need to adopt reduction targets based in science. We use the Science-Based Targets Initiative tool, and that gives us the pacing, similar to the Climate Commission's budgets, tells us what level we need to reduce by to do our part to keep temperatures within 1.5 degrees. And that gives us a year-by-year target and milestone targets, which for us is an 85% reduction by 2035 and absolute zero emissions by 2050. And then we need to properly resource those projects to achieve that emissions reduction. And we're pretty chuffed with ourselves at the minute because we just got our FY21 carbon footprint back, which shows an 85% reduction in our Scope 1 emissions against our baseline year. So we're 14 years ahead of our science-based target. But the work doesn't stop there. There's still more to be done. So that's the reduction piece. Adaptation is about behavioural and technological adaptation to support our communities to deal with the forecasted effects of climate change. So we do this by undertaking effective climate change risk assessment and proactive management and publicly disclosing that. This is also about championing the technological advancements and behavioural changes needed to support that low carbon economy. And we've done some behavioural change work at the airport, as well as some fun innovations, which includes humanoid robots and an autonomous driverless electric shuttle. And we're really proud that we were able to launch New Zealand's first electric plane last year with Gary Friedman of Electric Year, which was really fun. So those things happen, reduction and adaptation, alongside and within, hopefully, a just transitions framework. And this is the part that I think I'm really grateful for Malcolm having put a lot of thought into it, and the discussions that we've had for a while in this space within our organisation, which is about considering the wider impacts of this transition and trying to seek a truly sustainable and equitable transition for all. So the way I've had it explained is this is basically the biggest transition our economy has gone through since perhaps colonisation, and we'd like to think we can do things better this time round, starting with honouring Te Tiriti and learning from a Mataranga Māori approach. So for us, we want a just transition, as you said at the start, Rob, that's fair, equitable and inclusive and acknowledges those most affected by our changing climate. We also want to challenge polarisation and take an open dialogue approach. So this means involving potentially vulnerable communities and seeking feedback and ensuring that future generation needs are at the forefront.
Fantastic. In terms of you taking that more of a holistic, comprehensive approach, and congratulations on achieving that goal 14 years ahead of your target. That's incredible. So within the context of that just transition, what is your goal?
Yeah, I would say it's probably more of a commitment to practice rather than a goal which can be singularly achieved, although it would be really nice to wake up one day and say that just transition's done, what's next? We anticipate the world will look different as we go through this transition, but there are some values that we really want to hold on to throughout. So we spent time thinking about a vision for Aotearoa and Christchurch Airport within that, what we value now, what we want to remain true through the transition, and what we want to remain true on the other side as we come out. So this is how we developed what we call our principled approach, which is looking at people, planet, and prosperity holistically, not in silos, and using that overlap to guide us through a just transition. And I'm going to attempt to share one slide, if you'll bear with me for a second. Now, perhaps if I do, hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, we can.
This is the model that I've been talking about. It's about addressing the needs of a society to be fair, inclusive, and diverse, the needs of our planet for us to urgently reduce emissions and adapt according to a just transition model, and the needs of our economy to be prosperous and resilient, recognising that we're a market-based, globally connected, incentivised economy. And note, there's also a deliberate distinction there between prosperity and profit. We deliberately chose prosperity, which is similar to the difference between measuring GDP or taking a wider well-being index approach. Prosperity being more encompassing of the different types of value that businesses should be creating beyond just profits. So this model is about recognising that the overlapping target is critical to an enduring transition that brings everyone along. Right, that worked. Great. So it's also a recognition that the dualist siloed system has not served us well, where nature is viewed as a separate commodity for consumption rather than as part of an interdependent system. So we're learning from a Mataranga Māori approach to view systems holistically and as interconnected. We are part of nature, not separate from it. And so this is our interconnected principle approach. In a practical sense, everything we do has to support this model. So if you're putting forward a business case at Christchurch Airport, you have to speak to how you are adding value in all three areas: people, planet, and prosperity. And if you can't, then your business case won't be approved.
So in terms of the if I can say, the 3Ps model, it's clear that, and even in the conversations that you and I have had, you've talked about climate being just one driver for equitable transitions. So can you just give us a little bit of an overview in terms of what are the critical issues that you're looking for or planning for right now in the present and also in terms of the longer term? Sure.
So, at the absolute forefront is thinking about the needs of future generations. Airports are critical intergenerational infrastructure, and it's inherent to who we are to be thinking about the long term with an airport, and also feeds into that concept of kaitiaki-tanga and thinking about intergenerational well-being. We want future generations to have the ability to prosper and connect to the world in a way that's not harmful to our planet. And so, of course, we recognise aviation within that. Aviation sits in the supply chain of all sectors, providing critical supplies, importing vaccines, exporting food, and global connectivity. And for a relatively isolated island nation, it's really critical that we decarbonise aviation as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we risk cutting off future generations from the ability to connect to the global economy and mobility justice issues. So we think the sooner we can decouple from fossil fuels, the better, recognising there is, of course, a place for technology and behavioural change to do so. So that's a huge one. And part of that is also planning and implementing now the infrastructure that supports future decarbonised aviation. So that includes installing gate ground power. So when an airplane is on the tarmac at Christchurch Airport, it can be plugged into grid electricity rather than using auxiliary jet fuel. And we also have New Zealand's only electric plane charger, and we're looking into the needs, the energy requirements for future decarbonised aviation. Within our organisation, we're also broadening our interpretation of sustainability to be less siloed as well. We've traditionally had a more environmental focus within there, and now broadening that out to be more holistic. And we've been inspired by Dr. Kate Raworth's donut economics model that draws in the planetary boundaries work of Dr. Johan Rockström alongside social minimum standards, UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that donut economics model is a really great, comprehensive, interconnected approach. Again, consistent with that Mātauranga Māori approach. So this also underpins behavioural change transition around our internal organisation and our culture, where we all own responsibility for sustainability. So that's a really important part, so that everyone can demonstrate leadership in this space. I like to think of it sort of like health and safety. It just doesn't work if only one person is really safe. You actually need everybody to get on board, and sustainability is just the same. So I guess the other major focus for us at the moment is doing this amongst our airport and business peers by taking an open source approach. This has become a really important part of our business identity, which is collaborating for the greater good by sharing what we've learnt in decarbonisation. And that's hugely rewarding. I think it supports our positive mission for our staff and a really good values alignment.
Can I just draw out some of the more on the practical side of what this means? And you started to go there in that conversation before. I think it's important to realize that despite the amazing leadership that you've already showed, demonstrating that you're still very early in that just transition journey. So is there one practical example that you can share or that really showcases the just transition approach the airport has taken, which actually has led to a better outcome, whether it be for your workers, your business, or partners within your value chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have the example for you. That would be our electric taxi policy enthusiasm. So back in 2018, we swapped out our corporate fleet for electric vehicles, and we're looking at what else can we do in this space. Great, let's swap out the taxis for electric taxis. They don't belong to us, they belong to separate taxi drivers. That's their livelihood and business. And we pretty quickly realised, actually, this group is pretty vulnerable. If we put pressure on them in the immediate to swap out their vehicles, that's requiring a lot of capital costs that they don't necessarily have to put into this in an immediate time frame way. So they were a really vulnerable group that, had we pushed immediate harsh policy saying, look, no fossil fuel taxis allowed in our pen, going forward, that would have really detrimentally impacted that group. So instead we decided to go down the signalling. So this is where we want to go. We would like to be there in, say, 5 years' time from now. Can you start working it into your business models to have that asset change? Because we would really like to see more electric vehicle options for customers as they come through the airport. And the wonderful thing is, in doing that, that group weren't left stranded. They were able to come on board with us, be part of this transition if we pushed out the timeframes, and that allows them to adapt. And now also allows them to take advantage of the government incentives for electric vehicles. So another win.
Fantastic. I see we're getting questions coming through already based on what you just outlined, which we'll come back to later. Just briefly, you mentioned the importance of open dialogue with diverse stakeholders. Now, I think we all recognize the importance, but from someone's very early in the journey, that sounds quite daunting. I wondered whether you would like to share some of the practical ways you've gone about it.
Sure. So that a lot of our discussion in this space was happening alongside Trump's America, and we talked a lot about what we could do to ensure Aotearoa was working towards inclusivity, not polarization that often defies belief. So for us, this was about welcoming a wide range of information sources in decision making and taking an inclusive approach to that. And I don't mean balancing climate science with climate denial. What I mean is informed discussions with divergent viewpoints. So for us, we invited climate activists in for open dialogue. We had the School Strike for Climate Groups, Extinction Rebellion, and we thought it was really important for us to welcome them and be open with them. So we tried to create a really deliberately safe space for them to come, including tea and biscuits, that sort of thing, where the aim is open dialogue rather than changing viewpoints. And we had our CEO and leadership team participate in that in a totally open manner. And for me, who sits in sort of both the climate activist and now the corporate space, it was really encouraging to see those two groups come together and have a very peaceful and open dialogue. So yeah, I would definitely encourage others.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire. I'm just conscious of time. So what I'd like to do is say thank you and bring Catherine back into the conversation to open it back out to the context in terms of, well, that is great leadership. What are some of the system level changes that are needed to enable that leadership to go further, faster, with confidence, not only within business, but also in other sectors. So, Catherine, I really enjoyed your recent paper on just transitions, where you called out the implementation gap quite clearly, and we'll share that paper following this webinar. With the consultation on the ERP now open, it's quite clear that we've got a real opportunity to shape it. So what are the three things that we need to be advocating for to accelerate an equitable transition, and what can business do to play its part?
Well, thank you. I'll give full credit to my co-author, Dominic White, on the research that we've done around policy processes for a just transition. I think the three things that I would identify as so important, and I think Claire has just illustrated all of them in the experience at the Christchurch Airport. The first is collaboration and partnership in developing the shared vision and in designing and implementing and reviewing the policy. So this cannot be done by government in isolation. The second is measurement, monitoring, and review. I mean, all businesses know that what gets measured gets managed. And we actually need integrated indicators for finding that donut zone that Claire is talking about, where we're meeting socioeconomic needs and planetary needs at the same time. I think we've got starting points for that, but we don't yet have good indicators. And we need those in order to be able to set goals and then to measure our progress. And so we really need to understand how these impacts are going to be distributed and how resilient communities will be. The third is just really taking this integrated approach across silos, which Claire has just been illustrating. We really need to understand where impacts are stacking up, looking at policies and pricing and climate change, and who's going to be most vulnerable across all of those things together. And we need to be looking across the policy solutions beyond individual climate policies, looking at social assistance, tax policy, regional economic development. And then, of course, across all of these three things, we've got to take principled approach that's consistent with the Te Tiriti o Waitangi and help to draw on that deep wisdom of Te Ao Māori and Matauranga Māori. So I think that's the challenge that's standing before us, but I get really excited about the possibilities. In terms of the specific role of businesses in helping to achieve this, I think I also see three really important roles. The first is obviously to help to shape and inform government policy. I think businesses have a really important perspective on the types of changes that are unfolding, how quickly they're having, and how disruptive they may be. So it's really important to make that information available and to signal where businesses can take leadership and where they're going to need government support in order to be the most effective. The second is really being an active collaborator and community partner in localized transition planning. A lot of this does need to happen at the local level as well as at the national level. So businesses can be a powerful local partner in helping local communities. And perhaps the most important one is for individual businesses to be their own microcosm for living an ambitious climate transition and a just climate transition. So this means looking at where businesses are allocating capital, what impacts they're having, and how they're involving workers and communities in their decision making, and then how they're supporting workers, customers, and communities in adjusting to this transition. And of course, all of us need to be thinking intergenerationally about how we make this happen. To me, a just transition actually is about giving governments and business the social license to be really bold on climate change, and we really need to be bold on climate change.
Thank you, Catherine. And that's a really good segue in terms of our Q&A. And if I can open this out to the entire group, that's great context, and it's really interesting, exciting to hear about the leadership from Christchurch International Airport. The first question that we've got through come through is from an anonymous attendee. So thank you for sending this through. Claire mentioned that Christchurch Airport requires business cases to address all three principles: people, planet, prosperity. Have you had any challenges to that approach, and what advice can they share for other organizations considering a similar shift in business cases?
Sure. We, a couple of years ago, developed a group called Gateway Zero, a very airporty type name. But basically, it involves people from across the company in different roles that you can bring your business case to, you present it, and they will offer you the support to try and build or challenge you in those areas. So that's kind of, it's a collaborative process. You don't have to wholly have all the answers yourself, and you might have missed stuff. So there's again, challenging silos, a cross-organizational group that you bring your business case to that helps meet those various pillars. Because I mean, I am the first to admit the economic side of business cases is not my strength. So having that group to bring a business case to has really been really helpful for us.
Fantastic. And Kate, thanks for joining us. We'll be coming to you in a moment to bring the conversation back to the ERP and your insights. But before we do, we've got a question from Jess Roger. Hi, Jess. In terms of the work that Christchurch has led in terms of the taxi companies, which is awesome, quote, did you incentivize them all, or did you just encourage them?
I'd say both. It's a two-part thing, encouraging right now, and then once they've got their electric vehicle fleets, the idea is that they will be able to get into the pen without the same costs that a normal taxi driver would have to. So there's a positive incentive that will allow them to, I guess, make a bit more profit on each ride because they're an electric vehicle and because we value that. So a both answer.
Fantastic. And just a shout out to everybody online. Please send through your questions while we're talking. And thank you, Jeff Bennett. Jeff Bennett has asked, Catherine, how quick does Catherine think we can transition? It's a big question. Of course, no one likes change unless they are the ones doing the changing. Given the ever narrowing window with which to take action on climate change, do we push the agenda or allow it to naturally evolve? Catherine.
Thank you. That's a really, really powerful question. Part of the answer to that question is, well, we're transitioning already. I mean, this isn't something we haven't started yet. The transition is already underway. And while we haven't been as ambitious over the past decade as we could have been as a whole, there are individual businesses and innovators that have been at work. So there is a transition already happening. The issue is accelerating it. I was reading the UNFCCC's synthesis report on NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And as of July, with the increased ambition that had been announced, the world will have used up 89% of the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees C by 2030. So, I mean, that is how urgent this problem is. And what really matters is cumulative emissions. This is not just an issue of getting to net zero, it's how quickly we get to net zero and how many emissions accumulate in the interim. So, everything that we do makes a difference. And this challenge about how quickly we can just transition, we now know the direction is this issue of speed is how, and it's going to be a different answer for each sector. And it may be a different answer for different businesses within each sector. But I think the challenge there for all of us is to do it as quickly as possible while still meeting the needs of current and future generations and trying to balance those needs. So it's going to be a really big challenge for everybody, and we just have to do the best we can. But I think it is really important that we push as well as pull, because this is really urgent, and this is a core issue of intergenerational justice, because we cannot pass a destroyed climate system to future generations and consider ourselves to be good ancestors.
Thank you, Catherine. Great question, great answer. Watch this space. Simon H has asked the whole panel, is there any online building industry collaborations to build an ecosystem of staged employment? So I think in terms of bringing that out, any ideas of collaborations that's taking a more collective approach to employment pathways?
I can offer, a couple of thoughts just from international case studies, and I've heard case studies, I believe in Germany and Australia that may have done this, but where if a particular industry is being phased out within a region, the different businesses work together to help look at which staff are ready to retire, and then shifting the remaining staff to remaining businesses and sort of phasing it out. So across the region, it happens in a more managed way, and then actively working with the employees on transition education and training, and helping to identify alternatives. So I think it's about opening up transition pathways and making it a managed and signaled transition. I can't call to mind exactly where this has happened, but I know it has happened a few times. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing I think we're talking about, is looking and as Claire was saying, it's making this open source, trying to be really clear about which groups of industries are making a transition, where the workers might go and how they can work together and making that more manageable. That's a pretty high level response. I'm afraid I can't provide any more granular information.
I think maybe if I can just reflect on some of the insights that we've had from members. I think this is at a stage where we know that many of our members are exploring this, and they're not doing it individually, they're doing it in collaboration with others. And it's something that we're exploring ourselves in terms of what is the shared challenge or opportunity, and what is the opportunity to bring members together to take a more of a collaborative approach to develop those employment and skills development pathways. So this is something that we're scoping at the moment that we'll be sharing going forward. And as Simon said, New Zealand Steel and its partners are exploring that. So again, that's just one of our members that are exploring this, and it is mission critical.
Yeah, Robin, can I just jump in there to support that point? I just was reflecting as Catherine was talking about, the collaboration between government and all parts of society, but also including business, that is necessary to bring this transition to life and equity in this transition to life. And exactly as you've highlighted from some of the insights that we've got from members, this is an area that is ripe for business to come to the table with really practical solutions and pilot programs where we can be an active part of making the transition happen in a way that works for all of society and not just have policy done to us. So I think that there's a number of excellent ideas that we can explore and bring to life through, for example, through our ERP submission.
Thanks, Kate. And I think also just reflecting further is that with the disruption in the labour market with the previous and current lockdowns, there's plenty of examples across our membership, including Sky City, where they've taken a collaborative approach to ensuring that workers stay connected to meaningful work in a disrupted economy. We've got time for one more question. I'm just looking if we've got a question. Yes. Just bear with me. Leslie Stone, I'm interested in Catherine's focus on policy as the first step. My experience and research into values-based organizational learning and change requires an acceptance of responsibility and a commitment to contribute to the actions needed to act on those responsibilities. This commitment most commonly takes the form of shared values. I'd appreciate it if Catherine could comment on these precursors to policy. Long question, but very important.
Oh, yes, thank you.
A long time to reply.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I didn't mean to imply that it all needs to wait for policy and it can't start until then. I think a just transition is something that we all have to live. And I think it does begin with all of us challenging our own values about how we want to be part of a just transition to a climate system that works for everyone and an economy that works for everyone. So I think developing these values, challenging ourselves to find our own contribution to a just transition is really, really important. And I think it's important to realize that and I'll borrow this idea from someone else I've heard, New Zealand is a whole series of economies. It isn't a single economy. And I think we can begin conversations at multiple levels about what a just transition means for different groups, for different sectors, for different regions, for different types of economies. And so it isn't something that, a top-down policy solution can necessarily develop. So I would love to see ways to create more social dialogue groups on just understanding the potential of this concept and how we could make it a reality. So I'm really hoping it will evolve bottom up as well as top down, and it's going to be driven by practice and practical experience and not just by theoretical policy making. So thanks very much for an excellent question.
Thanks, Catherine. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's great to see the questions that have actually indicate the interest around this topic. As I said, it is a very important conversation and timely with the discussion document being released by government today. So I wanted to bring SBC's head of climate, Kate Wilson-Butler, into the conversation. And Kate, would you like to just give us your reflections in terms of the discussion document and the process from here in terms of the opportunity to shape the emissions reduction plan?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Kate Wilson-Butler tōku ingoa. So as Rob said, I'm the head of climate action here at the Sustainable Business Council. And first, can I just say, what a fascinating and inspiring conversation today. So thanks, Claire and Catherine, for your insights, and Rob for facilitating. I'm thinking we need a follow-up because there are so many questions and such a rich discussion. So thanks for the chance to offer a few words to link this discussion with the ongoing process to develop the government's emissions reduction plan. So as everybody here will be aware, the Emissions Reduction Plan, or ERP, will form the government's response to the Climate Change Commission's final advice released back in May. As Rob and Catherine mentioned, the Commission made some strong recommendations relating to ensuring a just or equitable transition to a low emissions economy for Aotearoa New Zealand. The key recommendation, the overarching one in this area, was to design an equitable transition strategy, it's been mentioned a number of times, that results in a fair, inclusive and equitable transition. The Commission recommended a number of ways this could be achieved, but that also included co-design with iwi Māori, local government, regional economic development agencies, workers' unions, businesses and community groups. So this is something that SBC, along with the Climate Leaders Coalition, strongly supported acceleration of as a crucial enabler of a fair, inclusive and equitable transition. And that is, you made the point, Catherine, about social licence, and I see that as a crucial part of creating an enduring pathway that all of New Zealand can get behind, and so ultimately an enabler of greater ambition in the long run. So, as we all know, the government this morning released its discussion document on the ERP, and we are all still digesting the document as it was only released this morning. But it does seem that there is significant scope for all of us to have our say and shape this area of policy, including in relation to, for example, objectives and scope of what the equitable transition strategy might cover, the process that might be followed for its development, as well as concrete measures that could be taken now to support employers, impacted workforces and vulnerable communities. For just a process update, I suppose this is particularly aimed at SBC and CLC members on the call. We will be running, as we did for our response to the Climate Change Commission's draft advice, a process over the next 6 weeks to develop a collective submission that represents a consensus view across our members. So more details about that process should be in your inbox already, but key upcoming dates include, we'll aim by the end of this week to get you some high-level analysis of how the document stacks up against the key recommendations we made to the Commission. We'll do an all-member workshop next Tuesday where we present that analysis and have a chance to break out into key sectoral focus areas. And then further into the process, once we've had our first draft of a submission circulated, we'll delve down into key sectoral or thematic focus areas, and Rob will be leading a workshop on the equitable transition part of the ERP document. So I think this discussion today has planted some wonderful seeds, and we look forward to discussing those more with our members as we shape our submission. And I would encourage everyone, SBC member or otherwise, to get involved and have their say, because it's clear there's a lot of work to be done to develop a plan that achieves our national emissions reduction goals in an equitable and inclusive way, and I think this is the time for us all to step up and be part of the solution. So, ngā mihi nui.
Thank you so much, Kate. And with that, I just want to say thank you to Catherine, Claire, and Kate for joining us today, and for the questions and for posed, and also for you all for joining us. There does seem to be a lot of conversation that needs to continue. I will be circulating a recording of today's webinar in due course. And as I said, this is the latest step in our work program that really seeks to put thriving people at the heart of climate action. So I'd love to hear from you if you have insights that you'd like to share, critical issues that you would like us to cover, or opportunities for collaboration to drive equitable transitions. On that note, thank you all very much for your time. Kia ora and go well.